The crowd gathered around the hole in the dry desert dirt. The blistering sun shone overhead, illuminating the features of the deceased. He was dressed in the clothes bought by the very man who had killed him. With one final look, the lid of the coffin was sealed, and one William Bonney, a.k.a. Henry McCarty, a.k.a. Billy the Kid, was laid to rest. His final resting place being the old Fort Sumner Cemetery, nearby fellow regulators Charlie Bowdry and Tom Folliard. Many townsfolk, especially the Cerrillos, shed a tear. Many of the locals had grown fond of the kid, and they would carry stories of Belito to their final resting places. But Bonnie's story didn't end with his death. In fact, it perhaps allowed the kid to grow to mythical proportions. Much like any person who has become mythical, legendary, or infamous, rumors of survival popped up. We see this a lot, be it with J. Frank Dalton claiming to be Jesse James, St. Helens mummified corpse being toured around the country as John Wilkes Booth. The list goes on, be it Butch Cassidy, Kit Carson, and a lot of us are still waiting on that new album crossover between Elvis and Tupac. But amongst all these names, all the claimants, one would gain almost a legendary, if not mainstream status. That is none other than one Brushy Bill Roberts. While a small media storm did gain some steam in his time, I think it really was his story being told in pop culture that cemented his status. And hell, it is a fun story. Don't we all want to see the outlaw escape? The notion of Billy escaping or faking his death and living to be an old man is a romantic one. I think this is why Brushy's myth has continued to this very day. We want Bonnie to escape. We know how the story ends, but our hearts want something different. Of course, when we think with a more critical mind and less with the heart, his story just doesn't fully add up. If you look back at our review on Gail Cooper's Cracking the Billy the Kid Imposter hoax of Brushy Bill Roberts, you will see how I said you probably only needed 200 pages to debunk Brushy. The full 700 kind of felt just like beating a dead horse. After a while, it's almost hard to see any other way. Brushy's story isn't real. He wasn't Billy the Kid. Which brings us to today's topic of conversation. Going back to Gail Cooper's book, you will have seen one book brought up more than once, and that being an unpublished book by Donald Cline, which for a while was that kind of mythical beast or our white whale. Luckily, Billy the Kid has drawn the interest of so many awesome people who are always helping research, preserve history, and shine a light on Billy's story. Thanks to the legwork done by one of these awesome people, Melanie Hubner, we are able to take a look at Donald Kline's long-lost book, I Wasn't Billy the Kid. So what were some takeaways that I had while reading Kline's work? Well, firstly, I believe a lot of stuff was covered in that Cracking the Billy the Kid book. So it was really neat to go back and see where it really kind of all stemmed from. So to try to discuss something different than when I did that book review, I took some notes, and here they are. The first note was about the dedication, which was made to the Roberts family. It says, who have been made to suffer so long and needlessly over the years over something that was never true. Which is really very true and often forgotten. We do always think about Pat and Billy and their legacies, but the effect on the Roberts family when telling this story just gets left behind. They were real people and deserve their stories told, and perhaps not have their names dragged through the mud. Early on, it also brings up that fact I had kind of mentioned earlier, that Billy, Jesse James, and many famous outlaws have had countless imitators. Again, very valid. Billy himself has a few really notable imitators in John Miller, Walk Along Smith, and of course one Brushy Bill. But most of the times you really don't get that full picture. It's kind of made out to be Brushy was the only person coming out and being Billy the Kid. The next note I made said that the introduction almost seems like perhaps Morrison himself was duped by Brushy rather than helping in the duping process itself. As the story goes on, we'll have some more notes upon this and kind of expand on that. As far as when Brushy was born, Klein points out that the family Bible as well as some other sources list Oliver P. Roberts being born on August 26, 1879, which if he was born in 1879, he would be far too young to be Billy the Kid, who would be shot in less than a couple years. Klein also goes on to point out Henry Oliver Roberts was born on May 18, 52. He is the father of Oliver P. Roberts and only a couple years older than the historical Billy the Kid. He also says that Sarah Elizabeth Ferguson was Oliver's mother. He also wanted to point out that William V. Morrison was a auto parts salesman from El Paso, Texas. Another kind of Texas connection, I guess, going on there as far as, Brushy lived a lot of his life in Texas. Another important date was July 31st, 1878, when Texas legislature finally organized Taylor County shortly after Buffalo Gap was formed. Again, much too late if Brushy was the historical Billy the Kid and born in Buffalo Gap, Texas. Kind of another fun note here, Brushy went to school but he did not finish due to the suspension for lack of attendance. Now, as far as going on to kind of like the actual Billy the Kid, Klein does give out some information that obviously being when this was written feels like it is not accepted. He says Billy's birth date was on November 20th, 1859, and he was born at 70th Allen Street in the Irish Fourth Ward section of New York City. He claims Billy's father was Edward McCarty, who died shortly after Billy, Joe, and Catherine had left for Kansas. Again, the place of birth and Billy's father still up to question today. There's quite a lot of people that have different records and theories about both subjects. Another one that likes to get brought up, we talked about Jesse James earlier, and this one, Klein does discuss Jesse James's time in Las Vegas, New Mexico at the Montezuma Hotel or Hot Springs Hotel from July 28th through 29th, 1879. Now, if we recollect back to Gail Cooper's book, and one of the things I mentioned from there was that Brushy had claimed to be Frank James. I figured it was in Texas, but Klein says it was in Arkansas where Brushy was going around claiming to be Frank James shortly after Frank's death. So he was not doing this when Frank James was still alive. And it was actually Brushy's brother Tom who angrily had to go down there, set people straight. He's not Frank James. He's like way too young to be Frank James. He's my brother. He's Ollie Roberts, and had to bring Brushy back home. Another note here says Brushy's fifth wife, Melinda, actually knew of his wild stories and disapproved. And when Brushy died, she actually destroyed the book that he wrote his quote-unquote adventures in. One thing, too, that Klein makes a note of, and I think this kind of goes back to, if you just tell the truth, you don't have to remember the stories you tell because they are true. But when you tell a lie, eventually you're going to flub up somewhere and people are going to catch it. Here it says, Brushy's stories often did contradict themselves. One says his father threatened the Texas Rangers would pick him up, but another, he said his father didn't even know he was still alive. Earlier I said we'd get back to Morrison and his feelings on Brushy. Well, Klein brings up that Morrison made notes of Brushy not having buck teeth that Billy was known for. Morrison also questioned how old Brushy looked, saying he really didn't look like the purported age. So you can actually see in Morrison's own notes, Morrison himself had doubts. Another thing with Brushy's appearance was that his eyes had these kind of brown spots in them that some people claimed were Billy the Kid, but brown spots were actually a trait in all males of the Roberts family. And then he goes into a lot of the people that had claimed, yeah, they knew Billy the Kid, this was definitely him. And much like we've done a million times, it says how quite a few of them didn't know the pre-1881 Billy the Kid. Mr. Gallegos is one of the people that gets propped up as, hey, he did sign this affidavit. That means, yeah, he's Billy the Kid. But again, it says at first sight, he was like, no, that's not Billy the Kid. He doesn't speak like him. He doesn't look like him. He's far too young, you know. And then after a while, and after Morrison coming back the next day and wearing him down, he coaxes out the confession in a way. He's like, are you sure? Come on, please just look at him. He looks in the eye. Oh, yeah, sure, whatever. It's Billy the Kid. But it also goes on to say that he also claimed that Henry had killed his stepfather, Mr. Antrim, which we know wasn't true. So as far as his stories go, perhaps also not as reliable as a lot of people said they were. So I don't know. In conclusion, I think it is very easy when looking at all the evidence critically, not just in this book, not in just Gail Cooper's book, but just look at alias Billy the Kid. Just look at what Brushy said was his own story. I mean, it makes Forrest Gump look like a down-to-earth, straightforward story. I mean, the story is super fantastical. And of course you add in he's too young, he's knowledgeable in Billy the Kid lore that is pretty much the same level that anyone could have been at by just picking up a book in Brushy's own time on the famous outlaw, including getting some of the very same small details wrong. He was known to hoax who he was before Morrison arrived, which differs from the story we're told, where Brushy was a recluse and didn't want anyone to know who he was. He was known to hang around the likes of J. Frank Dalton and Uncle Kit Carson, and what's the saying? Birds of a feather. And under scrutiny, he fumbled basic facts and names. As his family has said, Brushy Bill was born Oliver P. Roberts on August 26, 1879. And that's okay. He may not be Billy, but he will forever be tied to him. It may not rewrite history, but it is still a part of history. I've been to Haiku, I've been to Hamilton, and I do still recommend checking out the museum. You can visit his grave. The people down there were very, very kind. But at the end of the day, as Cline's book says, he was not Billy the Kid. Now, once again, I want to say thank you to Melanie Hubner for doing the legwork to make it possible for us to read Cline's book. And hey, if you guys want more Billy the Kid content, there's quite a few different good Billy the Kid Facebook pages, including The Life and Legend of Billy the Kid, as well as Billy the Kid's Historical Coalition. Also, our buddies have a great podcast called Chasing Billy. You can check that out. There's also tons and tons of really good books. If I were to name a few, obviously I want to name James B. Mills, Billy the Kid, El Bandito Simpatico. Also, my favorite before that book was Billy the Kid, Endless Ride. There's also To Hell on a Fast Horse. We've also discussed Billy the Kid's Grave. And of course, if you want to kind of go back to the original, there is The Authenticated Life of Billy the Kid by Pat Garrett. Granted, the beginning of that is fiction, but it's still a valuable piece of history. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you guys want more on Brushy Bill Roberts, a playlist will pop up to your left. For more about Billy the Kid himself, a playlist will pop up to the bottom left. And of course, more from us here at Cool's Paranormal. A link will pop up to your right. We will actually be in New Mexico come this time next week, so stay tuned. We probably will do a live or two, so if you guys want to see that, make sure to hit that like and give us a subscribe. And of course, guys, tell us if there's a topic or person or historical figure that you would like us to cover. Drop the name in the comments below.